In Hollywood disaster movies, survival usually comes down to a rugged action hero or a perfectly timed rescue. The characters face impossible odds, but the audience knows the script will eventually save them. In the real world, there are no Hollywood scripts. On October 13, 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 took off from Montevideo. Its destination was Santiago, Chile. To get there, the twin-engine aircraft had to navigate a perilous route straight over the massive Andes Mountains. The 45 people on board were not survival experts. They were ordinary civilians, members of an amateur rugby club, along with their friends, siblings, and parents, traveling together for an exhibition match. When catastrophe hit, no hero arrived to save them. These ordinary people were thrown into an environment that actively tried to kill them every single day, forcing them to rely entirely on their own will to live. Flying blindly through heavy cloud cover, the pilots misjudged their altitude. Believing they had cleared the mountain pass, they began their descent. The plane slammed into an unnamed ridge at high speed. The right wing sheared completely off, taking the tail section with it. The remaining fuselage acted like a high-speed toboggan, rocketing down a steep glacier before crashing into a snowbank at over 11,000 feet. 12 people died instantly. 5 more succumbed to their injuries that first night. That left 33 survivors, many severely wounded, stranded on a frozen glacier in the clothes they wore to a spring rugby match. Before the crash, the co-pilot made a fatal error. He radioed air traffic control and reported that they had already passed the mountains and were entering Chilean airspace. They were actually 89 kilometers to the east, deep inside Argentina. That single miscalculation created a deadly vacuum. Rescue planes were deployed, but they were searching the wrong country. The survivors were waiting for a rescue team that was never going to find them. The Andes immediately tested their physical limits. Nighttime temperatures plummeted to -30 degrees Celsius. The bright, high-altitude sun reflected off the snow, scorching their retinas and causing snow blindness. Dehydration set in fast, and eating frozen snow blistered their mouths. To get drinking water, an agronomy student among the passengers ripped an aluminum sheet from the back of a seat. By angling it directly at the sun, he melted enough snow to collect water, drop by drop, into empty wine bottles. They spent 11 days scanning the skies. Then, a rugby player with a knack for electronics salvaged a small transistor radio from the luggage. They strung up a makeshift antenna and managed to catch a faint news broadcast. The voice crackling through the speaker delivered a crushing update. The international search operation for Flight 571 had been officially called off. To the outside world, they were dead. The realization hit them hard, but it also forced a brutal psychological shift. If they were going to get off that mountain, they had to save themselves. Before they could formulate an escape plan, they had to deal with the immediate threat of starvation. They were stranded above the timberline. There was no vegetation, no wildlife, and their meager rations of chocolate and jam were gone. Their bodies were actively consuming their own muscle tissue to stay warm. To survive, they made a horrifying, agonizing pact. They agreed to consume the flesh of their deceased friends and family members lying frozen outside the plane. It was a decision wrestled with in tears and prayers. They crossed this ultimate moral threshold out of absolute physical necessity. Many agreed that if they themselves died, they wanted their bodies used to help the others survive. 16 days in, the mountain struck again. In the dead of night, a massive avalanche roared down the glacier and buried the fuselage, suffocating 8 more people inside the cramped cabin. It took the remaining survivors 3 days to dig a tunnel out of the frozen tomb. Realizing they couldn't survive another storm, they ripped the insulation out of the plane's tail section and hand-stitched it with copper wire to create a large sleeping bag. The avalanche proved the crash site was a death trap, eating their friends, fighting the cold, melting the ice. It was all just buying time so the strongest among them could attempt a suicidal hike out of the mountains. On day 61, 3 men set out: Fernando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin. They had no map, no compass, and no technical climbing gear. They wore rugby boots and plastic bags wrapped over multiple layers of socks. Believing they were close to the western edge of the Andes, they spent 3 grueling days climbing the towering peak in front of them, expecting to see the green valleys of Chile on the other side. This is what they actually saw: a 360-degree expanse of jagged, snow-capped peaks stretching all the way to the horizon. They were in the dead center of the mountain range. With the journey now looking like it would take weeks instead of days, Vizintin made a strategic sacrifice. He gave his food rations to Parrado and Canessa and hiked back down to the crash site to conserve their incredibly limited supply. Parrado and Canessa stood at the summit, staring at an impossible expanse of ice. Logic, geography, and exhaustion dictated they should give up. Instead, they looked west, picked a distant peak that lacked snow, and started walking. Over the next 10 days, 2 starving, untrained men hiked 61 kilometers across one of the most unforgiving mountain ranges on Earth. On day 71, the ice gave way to a rocky riverbed. Exhausted and unable to walk any further, they looked across the rushing water and spotted a man on horseback. The river was too loud to shout over. The next morning, the farmer returned and tossed a rock with a piece of paper and a pen tied to it across the water. Parrado wrote an SOS note explaining they had fallen from the sky and needed immediate help. The farmer rode for 10 hours to alert the authorities. The following day, military helicopters followed the hikers' trail backward into the mountains, airlifting the remaining 14 survivors off the glacier. They had endured 72 days in an icy hell. The miracle of the Andes stands as absolute proof that the raw human drive to survive is vastly more compelling and far more resilient than any script Hollywood could ever write.